So we're going to be in Acts 22 through 26. And this is basically this last section of Acts is following Paul on his journey from Jerusalem to Rome. His sort of last mission, his last goal, he was kind of a strategic guy. It didn't always work out for him the way he planned, but he did plan. And his plan was to get to Rome. And he's been guaranteed by Jesus that he is going to make it to Rome, and we're just following him on his trip. Now, it was prophesied to him by multiple people that when he hit Jerusalem, he was going to get arrested and bound in chains, and he's basically, in one form or another, in chains until his death, right? So this has not gone according to plan. And what I want to point out to you, I want you to look for as we motor through these verses is Paul's sphere of influence is going to shrink. He goes from kind of a famous, well-regarded, well-educated, well-respected Pharisee who is persecuting Christians. He gets saved on the road to Damascus by meeting Jesus in person, and that experience is so intense, it knocks him literally to the ground and literally blinds him for a season. And then he goes, and he's still a big deal. He's like, next to Jesus, he's the biggest deal in the New Testament. He goes all over the world at the time that he could reach by foot and plants churches everywhere. He has written most of our New Testament. Imagine if your letters were that awesome. Your emails, I guess, were that awesome. All right, but he goes from that, does that for about 30 years, comes back to Jerusalem, and brings him this big offering that has been taken up for him, and he gets arrested, and his whole world, his influence, his ministry, his impact shrinks down to like just a tiny, sometimes one person, sometimes two people. At one point, he's in a boat. We'll get to that next week. That's how big his influence is. It's whoever can fit in a tiny little rowboat, right? Most leaders that I know, if we're honest, don't handle that transition very well. If you're used to crowds and multitudes, suddenly only having one or two people listen to you, and those are your enemies, by the way. He's not surrounded by friends. And I want you to see kind of how he responds to this hardship that he's under as we read through. So we start in end of chapter 22. Paul's going to go to Rome. He's going to meet with the Sanhedrin in this section. Remember, he's still imprisoned after being falsely accused in Jerusalem. The Romans didn't like people that caused riots, and from their estimation, Paul has caused riots. And they're already nervous about Jerusalem in particular because they've been rioting and causing disturbances up to this point already. And now Paul shows up, and so they pull Paul out. They arrest him, put him in chains, and they interrogate him because the Jews want him dead. They are explicitly asking Rome to put Paul to death, all right? And so far, Paul's a wily, hard-to-debate character. He has avoided death narrowly so far, and now he's in the situation still where the Roman tribune calls a meeting with the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the highest ruling body in the court of justice among the Jewish people during the time of Jesus. This would have been headed by the high priest, and they were granted limited authority over religious, civil, and criminal matters by Rome. One of which was they could execute people for violating the temple, which they think Paul has done. It consisted of up to 70 members, typically made up of priests, aristocrats, Pharisees, which is significant in our story, because Paul was a former Pharisee. I think he would consider himself still, in some sense, a Pharisee. Sadducees, and scribes. So 4 things happen here. One is the tribune summons the Sanhedrin in verse 30. Then Paul defends against the Sanhedrin in verses 1 through 9. Then the tribune cuts the meeting short because a riot starts, as Paul seems to keep doing, in verse 10. And then Jesus appears to Paul, assuring him that he'll make it to Rome in verse 11. So Paul was a Pharisee, and he argued in this section theologically, basically saying that the Sadducees were mad at him because he was preaching the resurrection, specifically the resurrection of Jesus. The Sadducees were like the religious liberals of the day, right? They were going to that liberal, theological seminary. They didn't believe in the resurrection. They didn't believe in the sort of supernatural intervention of God. They were sort of removing those things from their scriptures and sort of taught a kind of do good, be smart, be a good person kind of thing. The Pharisees were the hyper-conservatives. I'm not going to name a denomination, but they were KJV only kind of conservatives, right? And you had these two factions that didn't like each other, and Paul's defense was, you guys don't like me because I'm a Pharisee and I preach the resurrection of Jesus, and you're upset about that. That was his defense. What's interesting here is the Pharisees, for at least a moment, become the good guys. We don't think of them as the good guys. We think of them as the bad guys because Jesus fussed at them a lot. But in this case, they defend Paul. Like, Paul's got a point. It's like if you're about to be put to death by a left-wing person and you make a right-wing argument that right-wingers come to your defense and you're not really on their team either. This is basically what happens here. It's a political moment in Paul's life that happened to save his life for a minute. That episode ends with Jesus appearing to Paul. I want to read this to you. So he defends himself against the Sanhedrin somewhat successfully. He's not released, but he's also not killed. And here's what happens. The following night, this is verse 11, the Lord stood by him and said, "Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome." I don't know about you, but I've never had Jesus appear next to my bed. But this happened to Paul. This is not the first time this has happened to him. And he tells him, don't worry, Paul. Everything's going to turn out fine. They'll release you soon, and you'll be back home with your friends. Problem solved. That is not what Jesus says. Jesus says, don't worry, Paul. Take courage. You're still on my mission to go to Rome. Now, what he leaves out, which we read about, is the way he gets to Rome is in chains. But he still goes. So sometimes, when we think God fulfills his promises, I believe. What's his promise to Paul? His promise to Paul is not, everything's going to be fine, you'll be happy and comfortable any minute now. What he says is, my purposes for you will be fulfilled. I have called you to go preach me in Rome, and that is, in fact, what you'll do, so don't worry about it. This is Paul's life, and it's also our life, always to some degree. So then there's a plot to kill Paul. I'm calling it an unholy fast. The following day, over 40 men get together in Jerusalem and make a vow to not eat or drink until they kill Paul. Can you imagine? I'm calling a church-wide fast. We're all fasting. No one eats until we kill Dylan, right? I mean, I can imagine. No, I'm kidding. I'm going to derail this sermon fast. Alan's shaking his head. But that's what they do. Do you see how holy they feel? How sanctimonious? How sincere they are? I mean, 40 guys agreeing together to not eat or drink at all until the job is done. That's dedication. That's sincerity. These people mean well. They're murderous and evil, but they mean well. They hatch a plot to ask the tribune to send Paul to the council to be interrogated again. And on the way there, the men would lie in wait and ambush Paul and kill him. So they go to the Roman tribune, the guy they've been interacting with so far, say, hey, we want to ask him some more questions. Just us. We want to set up a meeting with Paul. He's in your custody. Could you just send him down? And we just want to ask him some more questions. And the plot was, before he gets there, they're going to lie in wait, they're going to jump out, and they're going to kill him. Won't the Lord be pleased? That's the plan. But this little kid, the son of Paul's sister, overhears this and alerts the tribune. It's always a little child listening when you don't realize they're in the room. Heather's parents used to call her, nicknamed her Ears, because she had a gift for lurking in the corner of a room while they talked about things that they didn't want her to hear about, and then she heard it. This is little Ears to the rescue, who goes and alerts Paul and to what's going to happen, and he sends the kid to Felix, who is the governor, and they decide not to set Paul up to have him killed. Later, Paul gets an opportunity to witness to Felix and his Jewish wife, Drusilla. This is an interesting story. Acts 24 through 27. After some days, Felix came with his wife, Drusilla, who was Jewish, and he sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. And as he reasoned about righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment, Felix was alarmed and said, "Go away for the present. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you." At the same time, he hoped that money would be given him by Paul, so he sent for him often and conversed with him. When 2 years had elapsed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and desiring to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. So Paul is before the Roman governor, different guy, same story. Defends himself against the charges of being a rabble-rouser, stirring up conflict with the Jews. And Paul, in chains, witnesses to him. And when he gets to the coming judgment, Felix suddenly is alarmed, might mean he was offended, cuts the meeting short, and says, "We'll talk about this later," and sends him back into prison and forgets about him. Did you catch the amount of time? 2 years. 2 years passed in one sentence. Think about how long 2 years feels to you. Not in hindsight, but when you're in it. In hindsight, if you're over 50, it feels like somebody just snapped their finger and 2 years went by. But when you're in it, if you're in prison, you're separated from the people that love you, from your ministry, from your influence, from the impact of the people that care about you, all your family, all of it you're separated from. 2 years, you have no idea what's happening. You're just stuck. This is what happened to him. And it's not because Paul was causing problems, it's because he preached the gospel to the wrong guy. Felix was famous for being licentious, having wild parties, sleeping with whoever. They were wild partiers, one of the most famous Roman partiers in history. And when Paul said there's a coming judgment where you will be held to an account for the things you're doing, he said, back to prison with you for 2 years. And then when he leaves office, the next guy comes in and goes, I want to kind of make friends with the Jews because they're kind of scary at this point. They're multiplying. They're threatening violence. They're kind of a problem. I want to make friends with them, so I'm not going to release Paul. I'm going to keep him in prison because I don't want to upset them. That's Festus. Unfortunate name. The gang from Jerusalem still want Paul dead. They have a long memory. Isn't that amazing? Years have passed. He's been off the scene, not causing problems. He's been under house arrest for years at this point, and they see the hands change in the office of governor, and they go to Festus, and they ask him to deal with Paul, meaning either kill him or hand him over to us. Festus asks Paul if he wants to be tried in Jerusalem, and Paul demands that he be judged by Caesar, who in his estimation at the time would have a higher probability of justice. If you send me back to Jerusalem, they are going to kill me. They have the authority to kill me. They have the charges. They don't have to have any more proceedings. They are going to execute me. Maybe as a Roman citizen, they had the right, anyone did, to say, I want Caesar himself to try me. I want to stand before Caesar and accept his judgment over me instead of whoever else. He figured that would be easier. The problem is the emperor at the time was Nero. Nero's first 5 years were relatively popular ones, which would have been during this episode of Paul's life. He was relatively popular, kind of a normal, benevolent emperor. until at about the 5-year mark, he became a megalomaniac, murderous tyrant who is probably at this point most famous for burning half of his city and blaming it on the Christians, and then literally using Christians' bodies as lanterns in his little house inside of his gates, inside of his walls. Probably that's where we think church history says that's where Paul was executed. Paul and Peter. Peter was crucified and Paul was beheaded because that was a mercy afforded to Roman citizens. Paul has no idea that he's throwing himself from the frying pan into the fire, as it were. So then Paul becomes before King Agrippa, who comes to town. This is the Jewish king, Agrippa, not to be confused with the emperor. So you have the Jewish king Agrippa and Felix. They're hanging out, and Felix wants to ask Agrippa, what do I do with this Paul guy? So now you have another bigwig. You have the Roman bigwig, and you have the Jewish bigwig together. Maybe now Paul will be saved. So Agrippa calls a hearing with Paul and Felix to examine him again and hear his defense for himself. And Paul, interestingly, doesn't really defend himself very much here. I think he's basically done with it. He's not fighting anymore. And he's like, this is my mission. Anybody you put in front of me, I'm going to witness to. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're the king of Israel. I am going to witness to you. And this is what he does. He tells his testimony, ending in preaching the gospel to the most powerful man in the land other than the emperor himself. Let's read part of that, Acts 26, 22 to 32. This is right after Paul has basically given his testimony about Damascus and going around preaching the gospel, his meeting Jesus and all of that. Verse 22, he says, to this day I have had the help that comes from God. And so I stand here testifying both to small and great, saying nothing but what the prophets and Moses said would come to pass. So he's appealing to Jewish history, that the Christ must suffer, and that by being the first to rise from the dead, he would proclaim light both to our people and to the Gentiles. And as he was saying these things in his defense, notice when he gets interrupted once again is when he talks about going to the Gentiles. We talked about that a few weeks ago. As he was saying these things in his defense, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, you are out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you out of your mind. He's mocking him. Verse 25, but Paul said, I am not out of my mind, most excellent Festus. I detect sarcasm there, but I could be wrong. But I am speaking true and rational words, for the king knows about these things, and to him I speak boldly. For I am persuaded that none of these things has escaped his notice, for this has not been done in a corner. He knows about Jesus. He knows the story. He's the Israelite king. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. And Agrippa said to Paul, in a short time, would you persuade me to be a Christian? And Paul said, whether short or long, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for these chains. He's talking to the king. Verse 30, then the king rose, and the governor and Bernice, and those who were sitting with them, and when they had withdrawn, they said to one another, this man is doing nothing to deserve death or imprisonment. And Agrippa said to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. It's hard to tell here whether Agrippa was being at least tempted by what Paul is saying, if he was coming to faith or not. We don't know if he's saying, like, in a short time, meaning, am I becoming a Christian, like, incredulously? Like, so quickly, one conversation, am I? Isn't that how a lot of you felt when you, right before you became a Christian? You said, what? Am I starting to believe this? Right? That could be what he's saying, or he's mocking Paul, saying, do you really think you can make me a Christian in such a short time? And Paul's like, yeah, I think so. Think I can. I think that's what I'm trying to do. It's hard to tell. But I'm just blown away by the fact that Paul is in this moment, and he's not fighting for his life. He's not even fighting for his freedom. Instead, he's like, oh, sweet, the king is here. And he's winding his way through this conversation to get to Jesus. And he's finding his way there and speaking directly, and I think very boldly. He basically says, I don't want to talk to you, Roman, right now. I know you don't believe. Mock me all you want. I want to talk to the king. He says, you believe in the prophets, don't you? Well, if you believe in the prophets, well, they were prophesying about the Messiah, and Jesus came. He did exactly what the prophet said he would do. Don't you? I know you believe that. He puts him in a corner. When Paul was under such terrible and consistent attack, he didn't lose himself. I think one of the things we can do when we look at history like this, it helps you avoid boredom if you don't like history. But just try to imagine what you would have done realistically if in the same situation. Be really honest with yourself. Don't imagine yourself being a hero like Paul, making an impressive speech off the cuff to King Agrippa. What would have happened? What would you, knowing yourself the way you do, what would you have done? I can tell you personally, I would have been in the depths of self-pity and depression, and I would have been in full complaint mode. And I would have been trying to pull as many levers with God and with Rome and with everybody else, appeal after appeal after appeal, and I would have ignored all the opportunities to share about Jesus that were around me. I would have been most upset about how tiny my world had become. I'd have been saying to God, God, you know, my gifts are really not being used to their fullest in this situation. Why can't you have gifted me to be in front of these crowds and to debate these people, these philosophers, and to plant churches and to just travel around and suffer for your kingdom so that people are won to Christ. And then I come home and I'm hoping that there'll be a parade maybe, or just a small party celebrating, look at what God has done, maybe a retrospective video, you know, with some maybe casting crowns in the background or something, you know. Lots of shots of me in front of crowds, like with the camera pointing up at my prominent chin. Instead, I got none of that. I just get this. Nobody knows how hard this is because I'm completely by myself, unappreciated, unseen. Where's the impact of my ministry? This isn't fair. God, I thought you were going to come through for me. God, I've done all the right things. I've been a good little boy. I've read my Bible. I've prayed. I've been good to my spouse. I've tried to be a good dad. I've checked all the boxes. I've done all the things. Yet here I am under house arrest. And the only people I have to talk to are people that hate me. No one comforts me, no one understands, no one sees, but my enemies are all around me all the time. Remember that this took multiple years just being held in Jerusalem and Caesarea, with being constantly under accusation and threat from all sides. It's not like he's been left alone. It's constant accusation, constant threat. I could die tomorrow. I could die the next day. And the way I'm going to die is not quietly and peacefully. It's going to be under some sort of torturous, painful, humiliating methods. It's the only way. I mean, beheading is better than crucifixion for sure, but it's still unpleasant. Every day you wake up and that's all you have in this life to look forward to for years. And what I find amazing is that Paul was the same guy no matter where he was. He refused to leave his calling and purpose at the door. He carried it with him everywhere. That included house arrest, real prison, which was like a hole in the ground, being beaten, sometimes to death or close to it. Whether he was talking to someone by the river, on the road, at the synagogue, in the temple, in the city square with philosophers, or in the palace, he spoke the same way. It's the same story, the same gospel, the same Paul every time. He's unintimidated by the king sitting in front of him. All the power of Jerusalem and all the power of Rome threatening him, and what he does is share the gospel. Whether he was talking to peasants or kings, he represented the gospel in the same way, with both humility and boldness. I think most of us find it difficult when there's hardship to maintain our sense of purpose and mission. We tend to drop it. We flip our priorities on their head and become hyper-focused on reestablishing comfort and security as soon as possible at almost any cost. We become functional atheists, meaning you still believe in God, you're not an atheist, but the way you function is like as an atheist would. And we excuse it because we say, well, things are hard right now. This is an emergency situation. And in an emergency situation, I get to just act like God doesn't exist because I have to handle my life and take care of business. I have responsibilities. God understands. And so we just drop our sense of calling to the ground and we go, well, when I solve these problems and I have comfort and security back in my grasp, then I will return to my giftings and my callings. And it's mind-blowing to me that Paul in this situation does not do that for a second. He stays laser focused. I've got to get to Rome. Jesus told me to go to Rome. He told me I would go to Rome, so I'm going to Rome, and that's my goal, and I'm going to preach the gospel to every living being that's in front of me along the way, whether I'm in chains or not. By the way, this is the accusation that Satan levels against Job. He says, if you take away his comfort and his safety, God, Job will curse you. He'll forget you. It proved to be untrue. It's the same question with us. Paul passes the same test. I've wondered at times if Satan didn't go to God about Paul and say, he won't preach the gospel if you take all this stuff away from him. Throw him in prison. See what he does. I don't know. We'll find out when we get to heaven. But this same question looms over all of us in the same way. When hardship comes, will you drop your calling to the floor and call it survival? Or will you maintain, this is what God has put me here to do? God has not put me here to be comfortable and safe. That is not my purpose in life. My purpose in life is my calling. And that is the question over all of us. It is important, I think, to say, not everyone's called to Paul. Not everybody's called to be Paul. Okay? Woo! If you go out from here this morning and try to be Paul to Kernersville, it might work. But it might not. Okay? Because if you're not called to that, don't try to do that. Okay? So don't compare yourself in the wrong way. Right? You have your own calling, your own gifts. So back to this idea of your sphere of influence. Paul had this, God gave him this massive sphere of influence, which is sort of all the people that God's placed you around, all the responsibilities you have, all those things kind of in one big bucket. That's where God has called you. Assume for just a minute God is actually sovereign. And where he has placed you is a result of his intention, not yours. The job you have, the friends that you have, the place where you live, the income that you have, the time that you have, who you're married to, if you're married at all, if you have kids, the specific kids that you have and their specific issues, all of it. Assume all of it is designed by God. Not just you living your life, because we're not atheists. Remember, your life and your place in life is not the sum total of your good and bad decisions. It absolutely is not. You are not where you are right now because you took a left instead of a right. God ordained it and he placed you. And the friends you have and the enemies you have are ordained and his intention for you right now. You are absolutely where he wants you to be. And if you assume that, that means that the people you're connected to and the responsibilities you carry around, whether it's at work or in your family or in your church, all of it, and the people that are connected to you he is intending for you to do something. And if you're not thinking that way, then you're not doing what he's called you to do. Every single person in your life, he has an intention for you towards them. Your job is not just your job. You are not in this church because you just decided it's the best one in town. Because let me tell you, it ain't the best one in town. I think it's pretty great. I'd pick it. But you're here because he's called you here. And he's called you here to do something specific. And the way you figure that out, I'm going to make it simple. Don't overthink this. Is what are your natural abilities and what are your spiritual gifts? You don't have to think hard about where to use them. You just use them on a warm body. Hey, here's my gift. If your gift is service, serve somebody. If your gift is prophecy, go prophesy to anybody who's got the ability to hear you, which is basically everybody, right? You just go and you prophesy to a moving target of any sort. Prophesy to them. Don't go, I don't know if I'm really called to do that. Well, if you got the gift, why not use it, right? Gift of healing, start praying for people. You're like, how do I know if I got the gift of healing? Well, you won't know until you start praying for people. And it might take 300 times praying for somebody to find out that you got the gift of healing. Whatever it is, if you're good at, I don't know, art, singing, you're really smart, you're a good teacher, whatever your abilities are, look at your sphere of influence. It is not accidental. This is Paul's world. And if you're going through hardship, this has been my experience, is your sphere of influence shrinks. Sometimes it shrinks down to the size of a hospital bed. It's a tiny, tiny sphere of influence. You're stuck in a bed. You can't even go to people. So what do? Well, you got people coming in your room. They have to. They're paid to do it. And you can even push a little button on your bed and they have to come and ask you stuff. So you can prepare a little encouragement. Push the button. Somebody's going to come in to share it with. But what we tend to do is go, well, my sphere of influence is so tiny, I feel like a prisoner. Paul can relate. And so you say, if this is my sphere, this tiny little room, or this tiny little house, or this tiny little family, or this tiny little church, instead of complaining to God about how small your sphere of influence is, just say, God, this is where you've called me. And so I'm going to take my talents and my gifts and I'm going to use them for whoever comes through that door. Paul was chained at one point to guards. And his attitude was, I'm not chained to you, you're chained to me. I have a captive audience. You are required to be here because you're chained to me and it's your job. If you don't do your job, you probably get executed. So guess what? We're going to talk about Jesus. Can you imagine? I wonder how many Roman guards got saved and went back to their families and said, I've chained to this guy Paul today. At first it was terrible, but then I found him interesting. And he shared some things with me that are amazing about this Jewish guy named Jesus. And this is what everybody's been talking about. And that spreads throughout Rome. How many people, you got to wonder. Maybe the same thing is true for you. So I want you to think for a minute. I don't think you have to think very hard because this is your life. Everybody's got a different one. What's your sphere? No matter how big or small it is, it doesn't matter. It's what God's ordained for your life. So just stop complaining about the size of it. Assume he's sovereign over your life, that you're not the boss, he is. And look at your life and go, if every single person and every single responsibility that I carry is ordained by him, what am I doing? What has he called me? What are my gifts? What are my talents? What are they? And use them. Start being creative and use those things. And what you will find is that I believe the hardship you're in actually gets easier. It's amazing. As you stop looking at the pain and the difficulty and the worry about tomorrow, and you start being excited about what God's doing in your life right now. And being in the present is an amazing help when you're going through hardship. Just being, man, well, this was a rough day, but this nurse keeps coming in, and she's singing this humming. I say, what's that song? And then I'm humming a song, and the next thing you know, we're talking about Jesus, and I'm praying for her, and I know about her family and her kids and stuff she's going through. And then cool thing is she gets off, and then another one comes in, and now she's in my room, and it's a whole new person. And I'm just working my way through them, one Roman guard after another. Or you're at work in one of those horrible little cubicles in misery, just making widgets. And your neighbor comes in, new hire, because the old one lasted a week, because the job is horrible. And you say, hey man, what's your name? What are you into? And you just start talking. And maybe you're disappointed because that person gets fired 2 weeks later, but then there's another one, another Roman guard in the cell next door. This is Paul's perspective, and I think it challenges us to look differently at our sphere of influence. It means that you have to stop saying, my sphere is so small, therefore I am insignificant. Because God is sovereign over where you are, who you're friends with, where you live, the job you have or don't have. I've been fired a lot of times, and I finally learned it was God firing me. Because my pastor, who was also my brother, told me that. He said, you know, God's firing you, right? Oh, yeah. God's in control even of my employment. So this is a good time to repent. Have you dropped your calling? Have you gone into a functionally atheistic survival mode in your life? If you have, don't raise your hands because it's probably all of us to one degree or another. We're going to take communion in a second. This is a great moment to stop and pause and say, Jesus died for me on a cross by himself. He did that for me. And so, Jesus, where have you placed me? Help me to look at my friends and my enemies, my children, my spouse, my lack of a spouse, my job, all the things in my life, the things that cause me blessing and things that make me feel cursed. What are all of those things, and how have you called me to interact with them for your kingdom? So I want to encourage you to think about that. Communion is for Christians. If you're not a Christian, hey, let's change that. There's no time like the present. I would love to talk to you about that and then take communion with you. If you want to get baptized, it's a little late in the game this morning to do it, but we can always just throw you in, all right? Come see Scott right here. This was his idea, so come see him. So come grab the communion elements, bring them back to your seat, take a minute with the Lord, and then we'll sing one more song together.